People believe that when she leaves, the man who speaks the loudest wins. He sends paragraphs, he begs for another chance. He promises he'll change. He tries to convince her that she made the wrong decision. But psychology tells a different story. In many situations, what stays in someone's mind isn't the person who kept chasing. It's the person who remained emotionally grounded, respected the decision, and quietly continued living. His silence doesn't destroy her, because silence is cruel. It affects her because it removes certainty. When she leaves expecting emotional pursuit and instead finds emotional stability, something unexpected begins to happen inside her mind. Today, we're going to explore why his silence can become louder than any message he could ever send, and why emotional discipline is often far more powerful than emotional reaction. One of the most powerful psychological effects of silence after someone leaves is the emotional contrast it creates. Human beings rarely recognize the value of something when it is constantly available. In relationships, attention, affection, replies, phone calls, and emotional reassurance slowly become part of everyday life. They stop feeling like gifts and begin feeling like expectations. When someone has become accustomed to hearing from you every morning, receiving immediate responses to every message, or knowing that you'll always reach out after an argument, your presence becomes predictable. Predictability creates comfort, but it can also reduce appreciation because the mind naturally adapts to consistency. This is why many people underestimate what they have while they still have unlimited access to it. They assume your emotional availability will always remain the same, regardless of how they behave or the choices they make. When a relationship ends, many people expect that pattern to continue. They expect emotional pursuit because it reinforces their sense of importance. They assume there will be long conversations explaining feelings, repeated attempts to reconnect, emotional apologies, and constant reminders that they are still wanted. Whether they consciously admit it or not, many people leave expecting some form of emotional reaction. That reaction reassures them that they still occupy a significant place in your life. It gives them certainty that, despite the breakup, they still have emotional influence over you. But when that expected reaction never arrives, the emotional landscape changes completely. Instead of receiving the familiar reassurance they anticipated, they are met with something unexpected: silence. Not coldness, not hostility, not games, but the absence of the emotional pattern they had grown used to. Psychologically, the human mind pays greater attention to change than to routine. We notice what is different far more than what is familiar. This is why silence becomes emotionally noticeable. It interrupts the expectations that were quietly built throughout the relationship. The absence of your messages becomes more significant than the messages themselves once were. The quiet creates space where certainty once existed, and that space encourages reflection. Instead of focusing on your attempts to convince them to return, they are left with their own thoughts. Questions naturally begin to appear. Why hasn't he reached out? Why isn't he trying to change my mind? Has he accepted the decision? Is he moving forward? Those questions are not planted by manipulation. They arise because the expected emotional pattern has disappeared, forcing the mind to process uncertainty instead of predictability. This emotional contrast is powerful because it shifts attention away from your reactions and back toward their own internal experience. During constant communication, the focus remains on what you are saying, what you are feeling, and how hard you are trying to repair the relationship. Silence changes that focus. Without new conversations to distract them, people often begin reviewing the relationship through their own memories instead of through your explanations. They replay moments, reconsider conversations, and evaluate the decision without being influenced by your emotional responses. The brain naturally seeks to understand unexpected changes, and when your calm replaces the pursuit they expected, that difference becomes impossible to ignore. Instead of reacting to your emotions, they are confronted with their own, and that internal process often carries far more psychological weight than any message you could have sent. One of the most consistent patterns in human psychology is that people often recognize the true value of something only when they realize it is no longer guaranteed. This isn't limited to relationships. It applies to opportunities, possessions, careers, friendships, and even time itself. The human mind naturally adapts to what is consistently available, a process psychologists call habituation. When something becomes a permanent part of everyday life, the emotional intensity attached to it gradually fades. In relationships, this means that constant attention, availability, affection, and reassurance can slowly become expected rather than appreciated. It doesn't necessarily mean someone loves you less. It means familiarity can reduce conscious awareness of your value. When your presence is always there, your absence is almost impossible to imagine. Because of that, many people don't stop to consider what life would actually feel like without you until that possibility becomes real. This is why breakups often create a dramatic shift in perception. Before leaving, a person may believe they fully understand what life without you will look like. They imagine freedom, relief, or the excitement of something new. Their decision is often based on the emotional reality of the present moment, where your presence still feels accessible. But once the relationship truly ends and they realize that your time, attention, and emotional investment are no longer available, the brain begins processing a different reality. What once felt ordinary suddenly becomes scarce. Conversations that seemed routine become memories. The comfort of knowing someone genuinely cared becomes something they can no longer rely on. This transition from certainty to uncertainty changes the way people evaluate what they once had. Scarcity naturally increases perceived value because the mind places greater importance on things it can no longer easily access. Many people make the mistake of trying to prevent this realization by remaining constantly available after a breakup. They continue sending messages, checking in, offering emotional support, and reassuring the other person that they will always be there no matter what. While these actions usually come from love and fear of losing the relationship, they unintentionally communicate something else, that nothing has truly changed. If someone believes they can leave and still receive all the emotional benefits of the relationship, there is little psychological reason to reassess the value of what they walked away from. Constant availability removes the natural consequences of distance. Instead of experiencing the absence of your presence, they continue receiving pieces of it without making any commitment. In many cases, this delays reflection because the emotional comfort remains available without the responsibility of maintaining the relationship. This is why healthy boundaries often create more respect than endless pursuit. Choosing not to chase someone isn't about making them feel guilty or attempting to manipulate their emotions. It is about recognizing that your time, attention, and emotional energy have value, and they should not be offered endlessly to someone who has already decided to step away. When you stop treating your presence as something that can be accessed without effort, you quietly communicate self-respect. That message is often more powerful than repeated declarations of love because it demonstrates that your worth is not dependent on another person's decision to stay. People are naturally drawn to those who value themselves enough to protect their peace, maintain their standards, and continue building a meaningful life regardless of who chooses to remain part of it. One of the most misunderstood concepts in relationships is emotional detachment. Many people assume that detachment means becoming cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. But true detachment has nothing to do with suppressing emotions or pretending that someone no longer matters. It is the ability to experience love, disappointment, rejection, and loss without allowing those emotions to dictate every decision you make. Emotionally detached people still care deeply, but they refuse to sacrifice their dignity, values, or mental well-being in an attempt to control another person's choices. They understand that love cannot be forced, attraction cannot be negotiated, and commitment cannot be begged for. This mindset communicates emotional strength because it shows that their sense of identity exists independently of the relationship. Instead of making another person responsible for their happiness, they take responsibility for their own emotional state, and that quiet confidence often becomes one of the most attractive qualities a person can possess. When someone leaves a relationship, emotions naturally become intense. Fear of loss, uncertainty, loneliness, and regret can create an overwhelming urge to fix the situation immediately. Many people react by sending repeated messages, asking for explanations, making promises to change, or trying to convince the other person to reconsider. These reactions are understandable because the human brain dislikes uncertainty and instinctively searches for ways to restore emotional security. However, constantly seeking reassurance often produces the opposite effect. It communicates that your emotional stability depends entirely on another person's response. Instead of demonstrating confidence, it reveals fear. Instead of showing strength, it suggests that your peace disappears the moment someone decides to walk away. Emotional dependence places enormous pressure on the other person, and pressure rarely creates genuine attraction. More often, it reinforces their decision by confirming that the relationship has become emotionally unbalanced. Detachment sends a completely different message because it reflects self-control rather than emotional reactivity. A detached person does not ignore their feelings. They simply refuse to let temporary emotions control permanent actions. They may miss someone every day, yet still choose not to chase them. They may feel heartbroken, yet continue showing up for work, maintaining friendships, pursuing personal goals, and taking care of themselves. They understand that pain is part of life, but they also understand that pain should not become the foundation of every decision. This ability to remain steady during emotional storms creates an impression of resilience. It shows that while the relationship was meaningful, it was never the only source of purpose or self-worth. People naturally respect those who can remain composed under pressure because composure reflects inner security rather than emotional instability. The greatest power of detachment is that it shifts your focus away from controlling someone else's behavior and back toward improving your own life. Instead of constantly wondering what the other person is thinking, whether they will call, or if they regret leaving, your energy is invested in becoming healthier, wiser, and more emotionally grounded. You begin strengthening areas of your life that existed long before the relationship and will continue long after it. Your confidence stops depending on external validation and starts growing from your own actions, discipline, and character. This transformation is not designed to make someone come back. It is designed to ensure that regardless of who stays or leaves, your emotional foundation remains solid, your standards remain intact, and your self-respect is never compromised. One of the strongest psychological forces in human behavior is curiosity. The mind is naturally drawn toward what it cannot fully understand, predict, or explain. When every answer is available, every emotion is expressed, and every intention is made obvious, curiosity begins to disappear because there is nothing left for the mind to explore. This is why certainty, while comforting, often reduces emotional engagement over time. In relationships, people sometimes believe that constantly explaining themselves, repeatedly expressing their feelings, and making every thought known will create greater closeness. While honest communication is essential in a healthy relationship, there is a difference between healthy openness and emotional overexposure. When someone continually seeks to remove every question or eliminate every moment of uncertainty, they unintentionally take away one of the mind's strongest sources of emotional interest. Curiosity keeps people mentally engaged because it encourages them to think, reflect, and seek understanding on their own, rather than having every answer handed to them. This becomes especially important after a relationship ends. Many people experience an overwhelming desire to explain everything. They send long messages describing how much they cared, why mistakes happened, what they have learned, and why the relationship deserves another chance. They believe that if the other person simply understood their heart, everything would change. While these intentions often come from genuine love, they also remove every opportunity for curiosity. The other person no longer has to wonder how you feel because every emotion has been carefully explained. They no longer have to question your intentions because every answer has already been provided. Ironically, the more someone tries to eliminate uncertainty through constant communication, the less space they leave for the other person's own emotional reflection. Instead of allowing the mind to naturally revisit the relationship, they keep replacing internal questions with external explanations. When a person responds to a breakup with calm emotional restraint instead of endless persuasion, a different psychological process begins. Silence creates unanswered questions that only the other person's own mind can attempt to answer. They may begin wondering how you are coping, whether you have accepted the breakup, whether you are growing, or whether your life is moving forward without them. These questions arise naturally because human beings dislike incomplete information. The brain has a tendency to fill in missing pieces, often replaying memories and imagining different possibilities in an effort to create certainty. This internal dialogue becomes far more powerful than any explanation you could provide, because the conclusions are being generated by their own thoughts rather than being presented by someone trying to convince them of something. People are generally more influenced by ideas they arrive at themselves than by arguments someone else repeatedly makes. Healthy emotional restraint should never be confused with manipulation or playing games. The goal is not to appear mysterious for the sake of attracting attention, nor is it to withhold communication as a strategy to create anxiety. Genuine emotional maturity means understanding that you do not need to explain your worth repeatedly or seek validation through constant contact. You allow your actions, your consistency, and your personal growth to speak louder than endless words. By resisting the urge to chase certainty, you protect your own self-respect while giving both people the space to think clearly. In that space, curiosity often replaces assumptions, reflection replaces emotional reactions, and the relationship is no longer defined by desperate attempts to control the outcome, but by the quiet confidence of someone who knows that true value never needs to be constantly advertised. One of the biggest misconceptions about relationships is the belief that love alone is enough to sustain attraction. While affection, chemistry, and emotional connection are important, they rarely survive for long without respect. Respect is the foundation that allows attraction to grow in a healthy and lasting way, because it shapes how people perceive your character, your confidence, and your sense of self-worth. A person may admire your kindness, appreciate your loyalty, or enjoy your company, but if they begin to see that you have no boundaries, constantly abandon your own needs, or repeatedly tolerate behavior that damages your dignity, their level of respect can slowly decline. This does not necessarily happen because they are cruel or intentionally taking advantage of you. It happens because human beings naturally assign greater value to people who value themselves. The way you treat yourself quietly teaches others how to treat you. If you consistently communicate that your standards disappear whenever you fear losing someone, you unintentionally signal that keeping the relationship matters more to you than keeping your self-respect. This becomes especially clear after conflict or a breakup. Many people believe that the strongest display of love is refusing to give up, so they chase harder, explain more, apologize repeatedly, and make endless promises in hopes of changing the other person's mind. While persistence can sometimes be admirable in other areas of life, relationships operate differently because attraction cannot be negotiated through pressure. When someone repeatedly ignores your boundaries or continues trying to force emotional closeness after the other person has chosen distance, it often creates the impression that they are acting from fear rather than confidence. Instead of demonstrating strength, they reveal an inability to accept reality. Respect begins to weaken when people see that your emotional stability depends entirely on their approval. The more desperately someone seeks validation, the less they appear to believe in their own worth. And that lack of self-belief is difficult for others to admire. People naturally respect individuals who remain calm under pressure and who refuse to compromise their values simply to avoid being alone. This does not mean becoming emotionally distant or pretending not to care. It means responding with maturity rather than emotional impulse. Someone who accepts another person's decision without hostility, maintains healthy boundaries, and continues living with purpose demonstrates a level of emotional security that cannot be faked. They communicate that while the relationship was important, it was never the only thing giving their life meaning. That quiet confidence often leaves a stronger impression than emotional speeches or dramatic attempts to win someone back, because it reflects genuine inner stability. Confidence rooted in self-respect is far more convincing than confidence built on words alone. People are drawn to those who can experience disappointment without allowing it to destroy their identity. When respect is present, attraction has room to grow because people feel they are engaging with someone who has standards, discipline, and emotional balance. Respect creates trust that this person will not abandon themselves to please others, that they can handle challenges without becoming emotionally chaotic, and that they value their own life enough to protect it. These qualities inspire admiration long before romantic feelings deepen. Attraction built only on excitement can fade when circumstances change, but attraction supported by respect often becomes stronger because it is connected to character rather than temporary emotion. This is why protecting your self-respect should never be viewed as risking the relationship. In reality, maintaining your standards is one of the strongest ways to preserve the qualities that make lasting attraction possible in the first place. One of the most overlooked truths about relationships is that people rarely return because of promises alone. They return because they see meaningful change. Words can create hope for a moment, but consistent growth creates belief. After a breakup, many people immediately focus on convincing the other person that they will be different. They make promises to communicate better, to be more patient, to prioritize the relationship, or to correct the mistakes that caused the distance. While these intentions may be sincere, they often fail to create lasting impact because they are based on future possibilities rather than present reality. Human beings naturally trust evidence more than emotion. Anyone can promise change when they are afraid of losing someone, but genuine growth can only be demonstrated through time, discipline, and consistent behavior. This is why people are often more influenced by who you become than by what you say. Real transformation speaks quietly because it no longer needs constant explanation or validation. One of the biggest mistakes people make after a relationship ends is putting their entire life on hold while waiting for another chance. Every decision revolves around the hope that the other person will eventually come back. Personal goals are postponed, friendships are neglected, confidence begins to fade, and emotional energy is spent replaying old conversations instead of building a better future. Ironically, this approach keeps a person emotionally frozen at the exact point where the relationship ended. There is no personal evolution, only emotional attachment. When someone eventually looks back, they see the same person they left, still waiting, still seeking answers, still depending on the relationship for happiness. That lack of progress rarely changes the dynamic because the emotional foundation remains exactly as it was before. The circumstances may have changed, but the person has not, and relationships rarely improve when both individuals remain emotionally identical to who they were during the breakup. Growth changes relationship dynamics because it changes the person participating in the relationship. A man who develops emotional discipline reacts differently to conflict than he once did. A woman who strengthens her self-worth no longer tolerates unhealthy behavior she once accepted. Someone who invests in their physical health, career, purpose, and emotional intelligence begins making decisions from confidence rather than fear. These changes naturally influence every future interaction because they reshape habits, communication, expectations, and boundaries. Conversations become calmer because emotional reactions are replaced with thoughtful responses. Decisions become healthier because they are no longer driven by insecurity or the fear of abandonment. Even body language, tone of voice, and overall presence begin reflecting a deeper sense of inner stability. These subtle shifts are often impossible to fake because they emerge from genuine personal development rather than temporary motivation. Perhaps the most important truth is that growth should never be pursued as a strategy to win someone back. The moment self-improvement becomes dependent on another person's return, it stops being authentic and becomes another form of emotional dependence. True growth happens because you recognize that your future deserves your best effort, regardless of who chooses to be part of it. You become healthier because your body deserves care. You become emotionally stronger because your peace is worth protecting. You build a meaningful life because your purpose extends far beyond any single relationship. Ironically, this mindset often creates the greatest shift in attraction because it removes desperation and replaces it with quiet confidence. Whether someone returns or not, they are no longer meeting the same version of you they once knew. They are meeting someone who has learned from pain instead of being defined by it. Someone whose identity is no longer built around seeking approval, but around becoming a person of character, discipline, and lasting self-respect. Remember, your greatest strength is never found in making someone come back. It's found in becoming someone who never has to beg to be loved. Protect your self-respect, master your emotions, and keep growing regardless of who stays or leaves. The right relationship will never require you to lose yourself to keep it.